Tomasz Broda had been superintendent of Block 9 on Ulica Zara for 11 years. He knew the building the way an old doctor knows a patient, its complaints, its silences, the specific groan it made in February when the pipes contracted in the cold. He knew which tenants paid late, and which paid early, and which did not answer their doors. He knew the smell of each floor. The 6th floor smelled of cabbage and a particular brand of cigarette. The 3rd floor smelled of nothing. It had smelled of nothing since the woman in 3C stopped cooking. He found the first wrong thing on a Monday in November. Apartment 7A. The tenant had reported a leak under the sink. Tomasz went in with his kit and found the leak and fixed it, and was putting his tools away when he noticed the wall. The wall behind the refrigerator was covered in photographs, not the tenant's photographs. The tenant was a young woman who had lived there 8 months. These photographs were older than 8 months, older than the tenant. Black and white, some of them sepia, the oldest ones printed on paper stock he had not seen since his childhood. People he did not recognize and streets he did not recognize. All of them looking at the camera with the particular expression of people who did not know what was coming. He pulled the refrigerator further from the wall. The photographs covered every inch of the surface behind it. Hundreds of them, all different faces, all with the same expression. At the bottom left corner, almost at floor level, was a photograph he recognized. He had not seen this photograph in 30 years. He did not know it still existed. He had assumed, had needed to assume, that it had been destroyed along with everything else from that office, that building, that specific Tuesday in 1986 when a supervisor had asked him a question and he had answered it. He was in the photograph, young, 23, in the coat he had worn that winter, standing outside a building he recognized, standing next to a man he recognized. He put the refrigerator back. He picked up his kit. He let himself out of 7A and locked the door behind him and stood in the hallway and breathed. His phone buzzed. A notification. He looked at it. The algorithm had found him something new. He did not open the notification. He went down to his basement office and sat at his desk and looked at his hands for a while. Then he looked at his phone. The notification was from a news aggregator he did not remember downloading. The headline was in Polish, but the source was foreign. He could not identify the source. He closed the app and put the phone face down on the desk. The next morning he found the second wrong thing. Apartment 4B. The tenant had been away for a week, visiting family in Krakow. He had told Tomasz, "Could you check the radiator?" Tomasz went in. The radiator was fine. The room was not. Every surface was covered in text, not written, printed, in the dense small type of official documents, the kind that had once been produced in carbon copies across bureaucratic Poland. Lists of names, addresses, dates. The format was familiar in a way that made his stomach move. He had seen this format once, briefly, when the supervisor had shown him a single page as evidence of what the system already knew, to demonstrate that cooperation was the reasonable choice. He did not read the names on the walls of 4B. He left quickly. In the corridor his phone buzzed again, the same aggregator. He opened it this time without meaning to. His thumb moved before he decided. The article was about disappearances, a stretch of American highway, a town that did not appear on any current map. He read 3 paragraphs before he stopped. The names in the article were not Polish. They meant nothing to him. But the description of what the town did, the way it found specific people, the way it read what they carried and built a world from it, he read that paragraph twice. He put the phone in his pocket and walked to the stairs. The stairwell was wrong. He had walked this stairwell twice a day for 11 years. He knew every step. The landing between 4 and 5 had a slight lean to the left. The banister on the 3rd floor had a loose bracket. He knew all of it. The stairwell was longer than it should have been. He counted the steps between floors. 19. There had always been 14. He stopped on the landing between 4 and 5. He pressed his palm against the wall. The wall was warm. Not the warmth of a heated building. Something else. Something that came from the wall itself. He went back up to the 4th floor and used the lift. By the 3rd day, he had stopped going to the upper floors without his tools in hand, not because he needed the tools but because he needed something to hold. The building was changing in increments he could measure but not explain. The corridor on the 6th floor was longer at night than it was during the day. He had paced it. The difference was 9 feet. He had written this down, and then looked at what he had written and crossed it out. Apartment 5D reported a smell. He went in and found nothing wrong with the plumbing or the ventilation, but the smell was there. He knew it. He had last smelled it in a specific building in Warsaw in 1986. The smell of a room where paperwork was the primary activity and the paperwork concerned people. He was sitting in 5D with the window open trying to clear the smell when his phone showed him footage. Not an article this time, video. The aggregator had found it and served it without his asking. The footage was interior, a corridor. He recognized the carpet. He recognized the light fixture above the 3rd floor landing. He was watching a live feed of his own building's corridor from an angle that no camera in the building occupied. In the footage, a figure moved through the corridor, dark coat, head slightly bowed, moving with deliberateness from door to door, pausing at each one, not knocking, simply standing at each door for a moment before moving to the next. Tomasz looked up from his phone at the window. He was on the 5th floor. The corridor outside 5D was empty. He looked back at the phone. The figure in the footage was on the 5th floor now, 4 doors from where he sat. He stood up. He opened the door of 5D and looked into the corridor. Empty. The same corridor he had walked 11 years of mornings. He looked left. He looked right. He was about to go back inside when he heard the sound from the stairwell. A door. Deliberate footsteps on the landing. Coming up. He went back inside and closed the door and stood against the wall beside it. He held his wrench in both hands. He listened. The footsteps reached the 5th floor landing. They entered the corridor. He could track them by sound. Slow, even, the particular weight of something that was not hurrying because hurrying was not necessary. A pause outside the 1st door on the left, then movement. A pause at the 2nd door, then movement again. Getting closer. He looked at his phone. The footage was still running. He watched the figure approach 5D from the outside while he stood inside it. The figure stopped in front of the door. The handle moved. Tomasz pressed himself flat against the wall. The door opened inward. It opened slowly, all the way. He was behind it, invisible in the gap between door and wall, and he held his breath and watched through the hinge gap. The figure stepped into the room. It was wearing a coat, dark wool, long, the style of another decade. The collar was turned up. The head was bowed slightly. The hands were at its sides. He could not see the face from this angle. He watched it move through the room, slow, methodical, the way an official moves through a space it has authority over. It opened the wardrobe. It looked inside. It closed the wardrobe. It moved to the desk and looked at the surface. It opened the single drawer and looked inside and closed it. Then it turned. He saw the face. He had been prepared for something wrong. He had not been prepared for this specific wrongness. The face was assembled from several faces at once. He could see all of them simultaneously. A young woman, an older man, a child, 2 or 3 others he could not separate from each other, all of them occupying the same face. All of them looking at him from the gap between the door and the wall with an expression that was not any one person's expression, but was somehow all of their expressions at once. It crossed the room in 2 strides. It hit the door hard. The door swung back and caught Tomasz across the shoulder, and he went sideways into the desk. He caught the edge with both hands. The figure came through the door and reached for him. One hand closed on his collar. It was strong. The grip was not a person's grip. It lifted and he went up onto his toes and swung the wrench at the arm holding him. The wrench connected. The grip did not loosen. He swung again, harder, and this time he felt something give in the arm and the hand opened. He dropped back onto his feet and drove the heel of his hand into the figure's chest. It went back one step. He moved for the door. It caught the back of his jacket. He twisted out of the jacket and left it and ran into the corridor. There were two more in the corridor. They came from opposite ends, both in long coats, both with the composite faces, both moving at the same measured pace. He had 6 meters in each direction before they reached him. He went for the nearest door, 5C, and tried the handle. Unlocked. He went through and slammed it behind him and turned the deadbolt. He stood in 5C with his back against the door and looked at the apartment. Empty. The tenant traveled for work. He was alone. He looked for something to put against the door. The bookcase was the only option. He got his shoulder against it and shoved it across the floor and got it in front of the door and stood back. The corridor outside was quiet. He looked at his phone. The footage was still running. He watched all 3 figures converge on 5C and stop outside the door. They stood there. They did not try the handle. They simply stood and waited with the patience of things that had all the time they needed. His phone buzzed. The aggregator again. A different article this time. He almost didn't open it. He opened it. It was not an article. It was a forum post from a site he did not recognize. The post was a list. A researcher had compiled names. People who had disappeared in connection with a stretch of highway in America. A town that existed on no current map. The researcher had been thorough. There were 14 names now. The post included a scanned legal document. A public defender listed as missing. A medical examiner whose car had been found on the highway. A nurse practitioner from somewhere called Harlan County. He read the list twice. He did not know any of the names. He understood what the list was. He understood that his name would be on a version of it soon. He put the phone in his pocket. He thought about Pyotr Nowak. Pyotr Nowak had lived in the apartment 2 floors below Tomasz in 1986. He had been a quiet man, a schoolteacher. He had attended meetings that were not officially sanctioned, small gatherings in someone's living room, people reading things to each other. Nothing that seemed to Tomasz like a threat to anything, but the supervisor had asked. The supervisor had a specific piece of paper with a specific name on it, and had asked Tomasz to confirm it. In exchange there was an apartment allocation, a good one, on the right side of the building, away from the road noise. His wife had cried when she saw it. Pyotr had been gone for 14 months. He came back thinner. He came back with a quality Tomasz had not seen in him before. The quality of someone who had been somewhere cold and come back not quite warm. They had passed each other on the stairs every morning. Pyotr had never reported him, had never spoken of it, had simply looked at him each morning with the specific look of someone who knows exactly who decided something and has decided not to spend their remaining energy on it. Tomasz had requested the transfer 3 months after Pyotr came back. He had spent 30 years maintaining other people's buildings. He had told himself this was restitution. He had never used the word restitution. He had simply worked and said nothing and carried the name in the place reserved for things you do not examine. The building knew. He understood this now. It had been reading him since he arrived. It had found the name in its reserved place, and it had been building something from it ever since. He moved the bookcase away from the door. He opened the door of 5C and stepped into the corridor. The 3 figures were still there. They turned toward him. He stood in the corridor with no jacket and no real plan and looked at the composite faces and said the name out loud. Pyotr Nowak. His voice in the empty corridor, saying a name he had not said in 30 years. The figures did not move. I gave his name, Tomasz said, to a supervisor, in 1986, in exchange for an apartment allocation. He was gone for 14 months. He came back and I never spoke to him, and I requested a transfer and I have been working in other people's buildings ever since and I have never once said his name out loud. The corridor was very quiet. I am saying it now, Tomasz said. Pyotr Nowak. It was me. I am the one who said his name. One of the figures raised its composite head. A sound from the far end of the corridor. A door opening. He looked. Apartment 5H. The end unit. The one with the broken radiator he had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. The door was open. The light inside was wrong. Too warm. Too orange. He had seen that light before. In photographs. In old films. The light of rooms he should not have entered and had entered anyway. A shape in the doorway of 5H. Not a composite figure. A single shape. A man, slight, standing in the warm orange light with his hands at his sides. The face was not assembled from several faces. It was one face. A face Tomasz had last seen on a staircase 30 years ago, looking at him with the specific look of someone who has decided not to spend their energy on anger. Tomasz walked toward it. He walked the length of the corridor with the 3 figures on either side of him. They did not reach for him. They turned as he passed, their composite faces tracking him, but they did not move. He reached the doorway of 5H and stood in front of the shape that wore Pyotr Nowak's face and looked at it directly. It looked back. "I am sorry," Tomasz said. "That is not enough. I know it is not enough, but I am saying it because I should have said it 30 years ago on the stairs every morning instead of looking at the floor." The shape in the doorway did not move. It did not speak. It looked at him with the same expression it had worn on the stairs. Not anger, not forgiveness, something in between that had no name. Something that simply acknowledged that he was there, and had said what he said. From inside the building, from somewhere below, a sound, a voice, high and frightened, coming from the second floor. Tomasz turned. He ran for the stairwell. He took the stairs down 2 at a time, his hand on the banister. The composite figures were behind him. He could hear them, the deliberate footsteps accelerating as he moved. He hit the second-floor landing and came into the corridor. The door of 2F was open. He could hear the voice from inside, a young woman, calling out, the sound of someone who has woken to something wrong in the dark and does not understand it yet. He went through the door. The tenant of 2F was backed against the far wall. She was young, a student. She had her phone in front of her like a shield. The composite figure in the room with her had its back to the door. It was moving toward her in the slow, measured way they moved when they had found what they were looking for. Tomasz crossed the room in 4 strides. He got between the figure and the girl. It turned toward him. Up close, the composite face was worse than it had been in 5D. He could see more of the faces now. More of the people assembled into the same surface. He looked at them directly. He did not look away. The figure reached for him. He grabbed the arm with both hands and turned his body and used its own momentum to drive it sideways into the wall. It hit the wall hard. He drove his elbow into the back of its neck and it went down to one knee. He grabbed the student's arm and pulled her toward the door. They went into the corridor. The 2 remaining figures were at the end of the hall. Tomasz pulled the student left toward the emergency stairs. She was moving. She was fast once she understood the direction. He stayed behind her. They hit the emergency door and went through and down. 2 flights, 3, ground floor. The emergency exit at the bottom. Tomasz hit the bar and the door opened and the cold November air came in and they were outside on the rear service road with the building behind them and the sky above them and the fog visible at the edges of the street lights reach, but no closer. The student stood on the service road and breathed. She looked at Tomasz. She looked at the building. She looked at her phone. The screen was dark. The aggregator app was gone. The phone showed the correct time and a battery percentage and nothing else. Tomasz looked at the building. Block 9 on Ulica 11 years of his life inside it. The lights on the upper floors were wrong colors. The corridor on the 6th floor was lit in orange. He could see the shape of composite figures moving behind the glass on the 5th floor. He looked at his own phone. The aggregator was gone from his screen too. The list of 14 names was gone. The footage of the corridor was gone. The phone showed the time and a missed call from a tenant on the 3rd floor and nothing else. He put the phone in his pocket. The student was asking him something. He focused on her. She was asking if he knew what had happened. He said he did not know. She asked if they should call someone. He said yes. She asked who. He thought about it. Start with the other tenants, he said. We need to get everyone out of the building. She looked at him. She nodded. She started dialing. Tomasz stood on the service road in the November cold without his jacket and looked at the building he had maintained for 11 years. He had said Pyotr Nowak's name out loud in a corridor in the middle of the night, and then he had gone down 2 floors and gotten between a frightened student and something that intended to take her, and he had pulled her out into the cold. It was not enough. He understood this. Saying a name 30 years too late in an empty corridor was not restitution. Going back for a stranger when you had once given a neighbor's name to save yourself was not restitution. But it was different from what he had done before. It was the opposite of what he had done before. He did not know what word to use for that. He did not have the word. He was not sure the word existed. The student was talking to someone on the phone. Tenants were beginning to appear at the ground floor exit, confused, coats thrown over nightclothes, asking questions. Tomasz moved toward them and began answering what he could. Behind him the building hummed in the dark. The orange light on the 6th floor pulsed once. Then it went out.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.